Hello everybody, my name is Nathan, and I am the man with a cartoon obsession. It dawned on me that I haven't really talked about a lot of pre-2000s shows. That's mostly because I was born in 1996, so I grew up in the 2000s. I usually tend to stick to the 21st century, but I do like to try and branch out every once in a while, which is why I made the theme for this round of viewer-voted reviews, 90s shows. You all voted for the 90s cartoon and anime you wanted me to talk about, so let's get right into my cartoon review of Freakazoid.
Freakazoid, Freakazoid, Freakazoid.
Freakazoid ran on Kids WB from September 9th, 1995 to June 1st, 1997. The series consisted of 24 episodes over the course of 2 seasons. The show was created by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, who had worked on several DC cartoons. It was developed by Tom Ruegger, who had also worked on Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, and Pinky and the Brain. And speaking of those shows, I can't forget to mention that the executive producer of Freakazoid was none other than the legendary Steven Spielberg. The story goes that Bruce Timm originally planned for Freakazoid to be a normal superhero cartoon, but Steven Spielberg asked Tom Ruegger and the Animaniacs team to turn the show into a full-on comedy instead, and that's what we ended up getting. As such, I think it's only fitting that I touch on the comedic aspects first, because honestly, there's not much of a story. Dexter Douglas gets sucked into cyberspace and gains a crazy superhero alter ego called Freakazoid, and he ends up facing the villains in the show. That's really all there is to it. But like I said, this is more of a comedy than a run-of-the-mill superhero show. It's formatted like Spielberg's other cartoons, with different segments, many of which are recurring, and side characters that some of these segments focus on. My favorite of which being Lord Bravery. I definitely watch a whole cartoon dedicated to him.
You forgot the sugar!
Most people your age die. Why won't you?
Same goes for the Huntsman, if for no other reason than just to hear that theme song more often.
Hunt, 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 he's the huntsman. Into action is his cry.
The second half of the series consists of full-length episodes. They do still have some segments, but it's not the same as the first half of the series. The show also contains many Warner Brothers references and cameos, which is a staple of their comedy shows, especially in the 90s. Of course, many other pop culture references are made throughout the series, and most of them still hold up to this day. Admittedly though, there are some that I don't get. Season 1 episodes have different one-liners, mostly from Freakazoid after the end credits. In Season 2, those are swapped out with reused clips from the episodes. There are some jokes that are audio-based, and they're mostly funny. It's a nice way to mix up the humor in the show. Some jokes feel like they drag on for too long, however it works for some more than others. I also love the transitions in the show. They can be a nice source of humor as well from time to time. The show uses a bit of stock footage, but I like how they mostly justify it instead of just throwing it in with no explanation. During the first season anyway. During the second season, I feel like they're a little over-reliant on it. It kinda makes me think of Family Guy with its cutaway gags. Not all of them are funny, but a good majority of them are. Plus, they don't overstay their welcome. On occasion, they'll feel too overdone, like the recurring Relax-O-Vision gag in episode 9, but at least the show changes the pace up a little bit with these gags, and usually in a good way. Since I'm making comparisons, I hesitate to make this one, but this show feels like a predecessor to Teen Titans Go, in the sense that Freakazoid is a superhero parody, and that's what Teen Titans Go is meant to be. Plus, Freakazoid is an obnoxious character, but he only comes off as such to the villains, unlike in Teen Titans Go, where the characters also come off as obnoxious to bystanders and the audience. Since Freakazoid made an appearance on Teen Titans Go, I'm clearly not the only one who's made this connection. The show has a wide array of characters, so many that I'm not going to be able to cover all of them, but I'll talk about my personal favorites. Of course, I have to start with the titular main character, Freakazoid. I mentioned that he's the alter ego of Dexter Douglas, who isn't really that interesting. We only see Dexter in a handful of episodes, which makes sense because Freakazoid is obviously the more interesting of the two. After all, the show is named after him, not Dexter. Freakazoid isn't your typical superhero. He is crazy, and like I said earlier, he is obnoxious, but he really only acts that way to the villains, and more often than not, it's absolutely hilarious.
And out the left is something very special.
Where? I don't see anything.
Booga, booga, booga! Ah!
Freakazoid always thinks of clever and creative ways to defeat the villains other than just fighting them. My favorite has to be when he defeated the Loeb just by scolding him about how bad he thought his plan was. I wasn't expecting it, and thought it was hilarious.
What were you thinking? Explain it to me.
I'm not sure.
I have to give it up to Freakazoid's voice actor, Paul Rudd. He gives a dynamic performance of the role, and his range makes the character that much more enjoyable. He portrays this lunatic of a superhero very well. The only character I like more than Freakazoid, albeit by a slim margin, is Sergeant Mike Cosgrove. He's a police sergeant who's friends with Freakazoid. In the first season, he usually distracts Freakazoid from his mission by taking him out to eat or just going somewhere to hang out, and then he reminds him of his original mission after a while, which, by the way, is my favorite running gag in the show. I love the gag in the first season, but in the second season, Cosgrove mostly went on missions with Freakazoid, so that wasn't done as much. I mentioned that Freakazoid didn't usually actually fight villains. He usually got them to stop in other ways. Cosgrove is no different. In fact, he does it even simpler, because all he has to say to get someone to stop is,
Hey, cut it out.
It's your fault.
Ed Asner is perfect in this role. His deadpan delivery makes Cosgrove's lines feel more effective and comedic. Cosgrove is the perfect straight man to complement Freakazoid's wacky antics. Another one of Freakazoid's allies I like is Professor Jones. He's Freakazoid's second butler, and he's snobbish, and he's also the butt of the joke more often than not, but I really enjoy him when he's on screen, and I think he was portrayed well by the late Jonathan Harris. There are also some villains I enjoy in the show, such as Candlejack, who is a supernatural villain who appears and abducts people when they say his name. I like his design especially, but I just think he's a cool villain, and I wish he was seen more in the show. I could say the same for Dr. Mystico, who was only featured in one episode. He feels like a generic cartoon villain with the henchman and he's rich, you know, all of the standard villain tropes. What puts him over the top for me, though, is the fact that he's voiced by Tim Curry, and I just find it impossible to dislike any character that Tim Curry portrays. And then there's Deadpan, who naturally speaks in a deadpan voice, and she can shapeshift. She's only featured in one segment, which is unfortunate because I feel like there was more room for her to be involved. As for some of the more prominent villains, there's the Loeb, who I believe is featured the most out of the villains. As you can see, his head is just a giant brain, and he's smart, but he's also defeated very easily, but so is every other villain in this show. He also offers the most comedic moments out of the villains, and I think he's portrayed perfectly by David Warner. My favorite villain in the show is Armando Gutierrez, or just Gutierrez. This guy looks and acts like a supervillain. He has an eye patch, he's manipulative, he captures and tortures Dexter's family. In my opinion, he's the most convincing villain the show has to offer. The icing on the cake is the flawless performance from the late Ricardo Montalban. You can't tell me that this is not the voice of an evil mastermind.
Soon the world will be mine for the pickings.
There are a couple other characters I like, including Fanboy. No, not that one. That's better. He's, well, a fanboy and a big nerd. He loves superheroes and Star Wars and just about everything else there's a massive fandom for. Finally, there's Mr. Chubbikins, because how could I not mention the cat? Oh, and one final character I want to mention is the announcer, who is voiced by Joe Leahy. I always love when a narrator or an announcer adds extra personality to a show, and this is a great example of that. He doesn't have a large vocal range, or at least he doesn't utilize it here, but I think he adds a lot to the humor of this show with his flawless announcer's voice and his delivery of the lines fluctuating ever so slightly.
We interrupt this program to increase dramatic tension. Thank you. And now back to our program.
The show looks good for the most part, but some sequences look a little on the cheap side. However, sometimes that's the intent. There are also some other minor goofs, but nothing too bad. The character designs are all pretty cool and unique as well, especially Emmett Nervend. To me, he looks like he came straight out of a Klasky Chupo cartoon. I just realized I made it this far into the review and didn't talk about the theme song yet. When I made that top 20 catchiest cartoon theme songs video last year, I should have included this one. It's instantly recognizable and never fails to get stuck in my head. Plus, it sets the tone for the rest of the show, which is always a sign of a good theme song.
Super Team Extraordinaire, Freakazoid, Freakazoid, runs around in underwear, Freakazoid, Freakazoid.
Freakazoid ran for 2 seasons, like I mentioned earlier, but it didn't have a successful run when it was initially on TV. The staff cited issues such as always changing time slots and not appealing to their target demographic as to why the show wasn't more successful. Over the years, though, Freakazoid has become a cult classic. I've seen and heard a lot of people praising this show for a long time, and I wanted to see what the hype was about, which is why I included it on this poll. On one hand, I feel like I would have liked this show a little more if it was something that I grew up with, but that's not to say that I don't like it. On the other hand, a part of me wishes I had watched this show growing up, since they did show reruns on Cartoon Network in the late 90s and early 2000s. Maybe I did watch it once or twice growing up, but I honestly don't remember doing so. I remember watching an episode a few years ago, but that's about it. Regardless, this show was targeted towards kids, but it's clear to me that it really appeals more to adults, so I completely agree with the show's staff on that being a cause of its cancellation. I'm just glad that we got what we got out of the show, and that it still gets a lot of recognition nearly 25 years after its premiere. This show has everything I want in a superhero comedy cartoon. Entertaining characters, great dynamics between them, clever writing, great jokes, and most importantly, it always leaves me wanting more. Overall, I give Freakazoid an 8 out of 10. To be honest, I'd go as far as saying this is my favorite show that I've covered on a viewer-voted review so far. We'll see if that changes soon, because I still have one more show to review this round.
I want a can of hash and some coffee.
Nonsense. Eat what's in front of you and try not to dribble any on your clothing.
How about if I pound your head straight down into your tummy?
Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you have any other cartoons, anime, or other animated works that you want me to talk about in the future, please let me know. After all, it's not my channel, it's our channel. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and feel free to check out my social media pages, audition for an outro, and join the official Cartoon Obsession Discord, the links for all of which are in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
I'm Batman, and thank you for watching Cartoon Obsession.